The pandemic has turned the spotlight on medical and public health professionals as we turn to them for their expertise and advice. But that has led to a very disturbing phenomenon, and that is bullying and harassment, both online and elsewhere. We've seen it from those who oppose the kind of strong medicine many have been advising, and just lately, we're seeing what look to be reprisals against some who criticize the Ford government's handling of the crisis. Now, our listeners will have heard the whole controversy over Dr. David Fissman because he did consulting work for a union. Now, I first became aware of this because of a late-night statement from the Premier's office, calling him out. And then by the next day, he was defended by the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Then we see Dr. Brooks Follis of the Trillium Health Centre. He claimed that his contract was terminated because he criticized the government. His colleagues support him. The Canadian Medical Association has issued a statement saying this has to stop, that there is online harassment, bullying. I know that there are doctors who have left Twitter because of the kind of reactions they get. Let me give you the numbers. What do you think of that? It's beyond the pale, I think. 416-360-0740, toll free 1-866-740-4740. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. David Jacobs, Chair of the Ontario Specialist Association and co-founder of the Ontario Coalition of Doctors and President of the Ontario Association of Radiologists, and Dr. Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist and associate professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let us begin with Dr. Deonandan. Now, you were the victim, the brunt of some of this. You left Twitter, I understand.
I did briefly, and I came back. It's not unusual to get a fair amount of hate mail these days. And it's targeted at the lowest hanging demographic fruit. So in my case, I'm a non-white person with a non-Caucasian name who's an immigrant. So they go after my skin color, my name, go back to where you came from, that kind of thing. A lot of colleagues, they go for their gender, also their racial identity. Previously, I was sympathetic. I feel like these are people who have lost a lot. Their businesses are in shambles. They're upset that they're wearing masks, and they're looking at someone to attack. I'm sympathetic, but only to a limit. So they see like the talking head on TV and assume that it's my fault that these things are happening. And they direct their anger towards the expert making commentary and not towards the policymakers or towards the disease itself. So there's a lot going on here, and I don't really know how to process it.
It seems to be part of, what's going on overall. First of all, I think social media emboldens people because if they had to look you in the eye and say some of those things, they probably wouldn't. And, when you see what happened south of the border and the kind of intimidation and intimidation, that female politicians get, it all seems to kind of fit. Dr. Jacobs, what have you been seeing?
Well, I think that social media is a very ugly place, and it has been for a great many years. People feel protected by their anonymity to attack others. And there's another kind of nasty little bit of business with social media that I think we have to acknowledge, which is there are people kind of form teams. They form gangs, and they'll gang up on you. So whether you be pushing an idea that is from the left or from the right, you'll find that people will kind of move in packs. And sometimes these people who are attacking you are other professionals, and it's kind of hard to see. And I think that we all need to take a step back, and before we put something out online, we have to ask ourselves, would we say this in a professional capacity, and would we say this to somebody's face? And I think that's, we have to reflect before we go out and say things online.
Well, exactly. I think a lot of people have learned that lesson. You can end up losing your job because of what you say online. But, Dr. Deonandan, we've also seen that good can come of it. Yesterday, I talked to some doctors participating, Doctors for Justice in Long-Term Care, and they went from a few of them to 800 of them in a couple of days because of social media.
Absolutely. These tools have both sides to them, the good and the bad. And even when I receive some hate mail, it's followed up with scores of supportive messages. So it does reveal the good side of society as well. In fact, my takeaway message from my experience of dealing with the ugly side of society is I have discovered a magical side of society that is actually quite nice and good. And I think most Canadians are quite good. But to go back to this, the cowardly aspects of this, I think that's really on target here. There's an old adage, if you give a man a mask, he will show you his true face. And so much of this can be addressed, I think, if the anonymity has been removed. But we also need to distinguish between the organizational bullying, the disincentivization of speaking out, versus the personal attacks. I think what we're seeing is with, the firing of Dr. Fowlis and so forth that's an organizational thing. That's an administrative thing that I think speaks to a dysfunction in the way that our administrations run. And the other side of this, the name calling, that is a personal thing that speaks to the fiber of society that has somehow become disentangled with our lack of overall civility.
I agree with you. I'm hoping to tackle both sides of that equation. Excuse me. I want to give the numbers out again. I want to hear from our listeners. I mean, I talk to doctors on this show probably at least every other day, and most of the calls we get are respectful with questions. But, some of the things that I see being directed at them is frankly disheartening. And you guys are not monolithic. You have opinions, and especially for those from an academic background, the right to express your opinions is protected. And, it's just seems so, weird and ugly to see people, contesting that. It's 416-360-0740, toll free, 1-866-740-4740. We're talking about online bullying and harassment of doctors from people who don't like what they have to say. And we're also talking about what seems to be reprisals for criticizing the government's move. Now, Ray just brought this up. There's the issue of Dr. Brooks Follis, who was an interim chief of critical care, and his contract was terminated. And he said that in the conversation he had, his criticism of the government was brought up. Now, the hospital refutes this and says the government didn't intervene in any way. And, that's probably true. But I've talked to people who serve on some of those panels who are friends of mine, and they say very, very plainly, this is just a private conversation. There is no percentage in criticizing the government. And I can certainly see that without having to be told anything, the hospital said, this isn't going to do us any good. What do you think of that, Dr. Jacobs?
Well, I think that there's a lot of complexity when you're dealing with an executive who's been fired, and that's a human resources issue. So without having, I don't work at the hospital, I don't know this individual, so I can't speak to that particular example simply because I don't have the facts. Now, in terms of government reaching out and trying to hurt individual people, I think that that's highly, highly unlikely. It actually did, having said that, it did happen to me once. As the vice president of the OAR at the time, I had criticized the government of the day, which was Kathleen Wynne's government, for not providing adequate resources for digital mammography. I received a rather nasty letter from the Minister of Health at the time, Deb Matthews, which was threatening and CC'd to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, saying that I was spreading mistruths. Well, everything that I said was factual. and it was done for the greater good of the public, and yet I was directly attacked by the Minister of Health and referred to the college, or threatened referral to the college for that. So there is political reprisal. Do I think that there was in this case? I just can't say. Because I don't know enough about the situation.
Right. And Dr. Deonandan, there was this whole brouhaha with Dr. David Fisman. And again, I was surprised at, 11 or midnight the other night to get something from the Premier's office saying, we are really concerned because he's taken money from the Elementary Teachers Federation. It just seemed like they were, it's true. He never hid it. He didn't disclose it, but the disclosures have to be done at a certain point in time. I just thought that, they were trying to sort of point the fingers at people who disagreed with them, and quite vociferously and quite regularly. It just seemed, it seemed a little strange.
It does seem strange, and again, I don't know what the politicians are up to. I can't say that they were gunning for Dr. Fisman or anybody else. I do know this, that the attacks that I endure and my colleagues endure all seem to come from a political quarter that has some things in common. I won't say what those things are. They're pretty obvious. If you look south of the border, we see the Trump disciples attacking people, and that's not at the orders of Mr. Trump, but he doesn't dissociate himself from the outcome. So I think it's
some might say it is at the orders of Mr. Trump, but anyway.
So I think it's incumbent upon political leaders to openly state that this is not to be tolerated, even if they're benefiting from it. So I would like it if our political leaders would say, stop picking on our public health leaders, either as individuals or as organizations. That simple affirmation of our rights and dignities, I think, would help, at least a little bit. My biggest concern actually is not for me necessarily, but for the next generation of physicians and scientists who want to be public engaged, but now are quite afraid to do so. Many of my graduate students originally, when this pandemic started, were asking me how they could help. And I recommended, go on social media, answer questions, help people understand the science. And they started, and they were attacked as well, and they quickly retreated. So I don't know what this means for the future of public engagement of intellectuals. It deeply worries me.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I think that the people who are at greatest risk are the public themselves, because we don't go on social media and radio shows because it benefits us in any significant way. We do this because it's important for the public to understand the science behind the pandemic. If we can explain it in a way that people can digest it, then they are more likely to follow the public health guidelines that are there to protect them. They're more likely to take vaccines. They're more likely to take, whatever medications are developed at any given time. So this is to help the public. And, we do take a lot of heat for doing it. And I think that what we need to do is it's good to talk about it, but I think it's also good to talk about it amongst ourselves, too. We've got to be a lot more respectful, even amongst professionals, when discussing issues, whether it be between politicians or between physicians. We have to create a more respectful environment online, and hopefully the rest of the population will follow.
Okay, I'm going to take a call from Dennis in Brampton. Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Libby. Thanks for taking my call. And you touched on the William Osler situation, which I was going to comment on. But just building on what's already been said, I'm particularly troubled by what happened there. I live in the community. I have contributed to the hospital. I at one time was part of the leadership team at one of those facilities there. And I'm appalled at what seems to have happened there. Now, we don't have all of the facts, and so the fact that there is some reference to government involvement in what happened there, I'm concerned that when we start muzzling scientists and doctors and politicians become the dominant spokesperson for the critical matters of public health, I think we're down a very, very slippery slope. And that's my comment on that. I'm very concerned about what's going on.
And are you going to withhold donations or anything like that?
Well, I'm gonna send a letter off and say, what's going on? This is not right.
Yeah,
but I don't know. Again, I don't have all the facts, but looking at the reporting I've seen, there's where there's smoke, there's fire. Something has happened that has caused the leadership team there to take that action. Notwithstanding the support that he had from his colleagues and the fact they've already said, as a position as a leader, he had exemplary performance. So what else could it be?
Yeah. Well, Dennis, thanks for your call.
You're welcome.
Okay, people, again, the numbers 416-360-0740, toll free 1-866-740-4740. And I'm curious about this whole business about you have doctors at these various tables. And frankly, for a lot of them, I'm sure that being at the table, or if they're representing their institution at the table, it's good for their careers. And just this idea that, criticizing the government is not necessarily that good for their careers. I'm sure that the province didn't intervene in this. Well, I can't say I'm sure, but it was probably the hospital administration itself saying, hey, this may not be doing us any good. Dr. Jacobs, do you have a view about all this collaboration between the province and doctors? Is that, or can it be problematic?
Well, I think that what we have to think about is what is the purpose of these tables, of these science tables. And I think if the science tables are just filled with people who agree with each other, then they're not very productive. You do need to have voices at the table who are in disagreement. You do have to have people who don't, who challenge your ideas. And in challenging your ideas, you'll end up with a better product at the end. Now, and I think that when you look at what the Ford government how they've handled this, it's a little tricky for them. When we go through our panel of research ethics program, and we all do this as researchers, we all have to take this course, one of the sections that we go over is conflict of interest. And what we talk about with conflict of interest is that, and I can even quote it, it says, even the appearance of a conflict of interest can damage the trust and relationship with the research community that the research community depends on. So here we've got a table of scientists who are all very well respected and would never do anything unethical. These are really top dogs. Dr. Fissman, everyone at the table are really top dogs. But what Ford has to do now is rebuild trust in that table. Should Fissman be at the table? Absolutely. He's got a lot of good ideas and a lot of experience to bring to the table. But Ford has to reassure the public who doesn't understand all of these things that it's important to have people, to have him at the table. So I think some people looked at this as an attack on Fissman. I think the fact that Dr. Staney Brown has kept him at the table and that Ford hasn't released him from the table shows that they actually do value his opinion. So I think that we have to... Or
Chrystia Freeland's they value.
I think Chrystia Freeland is very kind of her to do that, but I think that we do have to also remember that there's another party at play, and that's the general public. And what we are all doing is for the general public.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think part of it is, doctors as a group are not necessarily used to being in the spotlight to this extent.
We're terrible at it. we're
some of you are, and some of you are pretty darn good at it, I must say. Okay, so Dr. Deonandan, have you noticed any kind of, I mean, it was, I think, yesterday or Tuesday that the CMA put out that letter. Have you noticed any impact from it?
Not really. No, I'm not a physician. I'm a PhD scientist. Yeah. I'm not deeply in the medical world, so I wouldn't be privy to that. But I do want to say that the public has to recognize that there aren't any incentives, really, for physicians or scientists to be involved in this public commentary game, or even advising the government as they do on the science tables, other than personal prestige. There seems to be this narrative that we're paid to grant money. We get rich from advocating for vaccines. We get rich somehow for being pro-economic restrictions to control the pandemic. None of that is true. In fact, if anything, we're highly disincentivized from doing this. I would get my full salary if I just shut my mouth and stayed home and played with my baby and did my work. But we do this because we want to serve the public good. And the public pays my salary, and I feel it is ethically incumbent upon me to give something back in the form of public education. It's strange, though, that these new roles are being clouded by certain agents in society, and I have to suspect there's some organized disinformation campaigns going on. If I look at the attacks we see on Twitter, they seem to use the same language, come from the same places. If I do a media interview, suddenly I get a barrage of hate mail, all using the same language, pointing to the same elements. So it looks a little bit organized. I start to wonder, are there elements in our society that are organizing against public health voices?
100% agree. There are, and it's scary. They tend to repeat the same message. They have the same lines of attacks. And just to be aware, they do have, this is a conspiracy. There are whole chat rooms dedicated to anti-vaccine, to pro-hydroxychloroquine, to all sorts of things. There are communities built around this. So what you're perceiving is not conspiracy. It's unfortunately the truth. And it becomes very, very difficult to fight against these scientific mistruths when people have so much invested in it, when it becomes almost their social life. It becomes very difficult to shake people from these ill-conceived notions.
Okay, to wrap things up, I'm going to turn to an actual question of substance. We've just received some more bad news about the vaccine rollout. We're getting fewer doses by the end of the quarter than the Prime Minister assured us the other day, 500,000 fewer doses by the end of March. We've had new accounting that says, really, our population is not going to be vaccinated by the end of September. Try the middle of 2022. Dr. Deonandan, what do you make of that?
Deeply disappointing, and for a number of reasons. Obviously, for epidemiological and medical reasons, but also because I worry about public compliance and reaction. I don't know how much more a population can handle the mitigation tools to put into place. What I'm hoping is that this spurs our leaders to do additional negotiations, get access to different formulations of vaccine, because at a global level, we can actually accelerate production of a variety of formulations. So I'm so optimistic that that solution can still be found.
Okay, and Dr. Jacobs, your view of that?
Oh, this is a very, very dangerous situation for Canadians. We've got new variants which are highly contagious. It's crushing our economy. It's filling our hospitals. This is something that required all of our attention from right from the beginning. There is a way out of it. The way out of it is local production. We do have vaccine production capacity in Canada. We've always had it. We still do. So it's a matter of negotiating the proper contracts and retooling some of our factories and just getting going. We cannot wait until mid-2022 to vaccinate the population. This should be a national emergency. We need to get right on top of this, and we can do it, but we just need the political will to do it.
Okay, I'm going to leave you with a hopeful for some, but disappointing note. My nephew and his partner are studying in Israel. They both got their vaccinations 2 days ago. They're not citizens. They are 25 and 27. There you go.
And that's the way it should be. And that's the way it should be across the globe. We need to emulate success.
Okay. Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Dr. David Jacobs and Dr. Ray Deonandan. Thanks for your time.